Welcome and good day to all of our listeners. Welcome back to Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. I'm Brandon James Sim, interviewing your content creator, Chris Noble. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Brandon. So excited to talk about all these topics, but especially today, giants. It's going to be a good one.
Yes, you could say it's a big topic for sure. Wow, wow. I'm going to just apologize. I have a bit of a head cold, so if you hear any stuffiness or if I sneeze or cough, please do forgive me. I don't have the remedy just yet. But anyway, so getting into it, giants. So you know what, Chris, I've been bugging you for a while to talk about this. I know it's not ancient anomalies per se, but in a sense, sometimes we can't actually go into the past without running into this. Giants come up in documentary that are documentary articles, documents that that inspire archaeology. One of them being the Bible, Genesis. The Old and New Testament talks about them, and I know that this has been a compass for a lot of archaeologists. We are both in North America. In North America, there are amazing structures left by the ancestors here, the mounds. And I actually read an interesting book. It was called, I believe it was called The Ancient Giants That Once Ruled North America. And it was all about these primary documents about uncovering giant bones in the mounds that litter the Mississippi Valley and other spots. There it is. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, available on Amazon. Your local library probably has it. Very interesting read. Now, I'm under the impression that everyone says these are all hoaxes. There are hundreds of these anecdotes, if not hundreds, then copious amounts. Enough that it was just so astonishing for me. Chris, where's your mind on this? Like, where does your mind go with giants? Is this all just a phenomenon of children's stories that we worship as a culture, or?
Great question, Brandon. For those listening and watching this, it's what we got to start recognizing is when we talk about myth and legend, that is almost always a decision that we're making as modern historians, let's say. Because when you get these stories from the original source, they're not telling them as a myth or a legend. Sometimes they are, but they're based off of previous stories of accounts, of real accounts. And they become myths and legends. It's that great line from Tolkien, right? Fact becomes story, story becomes myth, myth becomes legend. And after many, many thousands of years, these things almost sometimes, a lot of the time, drift out of knowledge altogether. So when we're looking back through ancient scriptures like the Bible or like so many other ancient scriptures that mention giants or beings that are just much, much larger than humans, and they maybe are humanoid, but not fully human or very human, it's you get a real range. You don't just get one type of giant, you get many types of giants. And so you have to start asking yourself these questions. What is the difference between myth and reality? And how can we start to decipher the difference between those two? And I think one of the things that helps is to start, when you start seeing these myths repeated from cultures that have a disconnection from one another, let's say either geographically and also through time. So we get myths about giants from every continent on this planet, from lots of these ancient cultures, a lot of Aboriginal, native cultures, indigenous cultures, lots of them, not just in North America, but all around the world have stories of giants and many other beings, monsters, cryptids, whatever you want to call them. And so I think, and then one of the things we want to do here on Ancient Mysteries Unearthed is just bring all these stories and myths and legends to you, the listener and the watcher, and let you decide what you think is fact or fiction. Because at the end of the day, to say it's all a hoax, I think is a disservice, because now we're just going to say no to everything that comes out in that one area, and we could be missing on some incredible information. And then on the flip side, to say that it's all real is also a disservice, and also just as bad as the other, because you're now going to be more gullible and not using healthy skepticism, which we should be doing. So in today's talk, I would love to just, outline some of the things that we have come across that are pretty interesting and compelling, and then let you guys decide at the end what you think. because I think there's a lot of validity to this idea of giants. I think that, as we're going to get into in today's discussion, there was once a time where you could talk about giants and you could talk about it in very esteemed academic settings, and they would not think you're crazy. If anything, they would be open to a real intellectual discussion about this. So, yeah, what do you think about all that, Brandon?
Uh well, this is a one of these topics that is either seen as a bunch of gobbledygook or is the most fascinating thing you could talk about, frankly. It's an amazing thing, but we all know the concept of a giant. I don't know when did I not know the concept of a giant? It's almost inherent in our lore.
Children's fairy tales. I listened to stories as a kid that talked about giants all the time. You get them in Disney, you get them in, all these different entertainment stories, movies, whatever, right?
Well, and it's funny that we were talking about, you know, first peoples, and that's so cross cultural. I mean, the first peoples of England talk about giants. The first peoples of New Zealand talk about giants. They're just everywhere. The further back we go in society, in our history, in our collective awareness, the more stories there are of giants, almost as if they're extinct or, as extinct as they can be. I mean,
Endangered.
they're endangered. Yes. Well, you do hear weird stories bubbling up. But one thing that gets me is, and people ask me about ghosts sometimes. And my point about ghosts is that if it's cross-cultural, I mean, Shakespeare wrote about ghosts, right? You go to Japan and China, they talk about spirits and ghosts, and these are always, relics of our ancestors or the dead, caught between worlds, here to tell us messages. They're here, but they're not. They're apparitions. It's so cross-cultural that I'm like, there's something to it. Whether we believe in ghosts or not, people are still seeing ghosts and have ghost stories. Chances are someone who has a ghost story. So when giants are discussed societally, that's maybe not even a word, but across all these societies and all these cultures, they have stories of giants. And the weird thing is, some very small details start to line up. Like one thing is the red hair. I keep hearing about red hair, and I'm like, what do I know? I'm no expert, but I love these stories. And I'm just like, when I hear a thing like red hair, it's just shocking. And it's a shocking detail. Like if you've never seen a European before and you're living down in New Zealand, and you talk about a giant showing up to your village on a boat with red hair and eating people. Another thing, cannibalistic, they eat people. I had to smash them and eat their bones, right? Like that's what we keep hearing. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. These are cannibalistic giants. In a lot of instances, I hear double sets of teeth, and their teeth are perfect, almost like a shark. I think about how maybe their teeth are being replenished because they do have the ability to maybe eat bones. I don't know. These are all interesting conversation topics.
Six fingers, six toes as well
Oh
in
yes,
each. That's a big
that's
one
another
too.
one. Yeah. So certainly very humanistic, but then again, other than just the size, there are certain qualities that would suggest it's a different type of humanoid. Now, um, I've read some Stitchin, Zachariah Sitchin, and when we get into biblical references like the Nephilim, um, he's talking about a race of aliens. Some people believe that the Nephilim are the descendants of fallen angels with humans, or something in the mix that gives them the people of renown, right? So there's a lot of interpretation that has been going on, and obviously no one has the right answer. Otherwise, we would just know about this stuff. But what do we see, Chris? Like what are some of the instances that we see? And I'll leave it up for discussion whether you want to go modern or ancient as far as evidence of giants. What interests you?
Well, I'll just start with some things that I saw in Egypt first, and I don't have any photos to share right now on this, but there's a lot of hieroglyphics where it shows large humans and small humans. Now, every time you see this, and it's everywhere, it's all over the place. It's so common. It's It's all the time. So the explanation that's always given by the Egyptologists is that this is a metaphor, right? It's metaphorical. The larger the person, the larger their stature, right? The larger their place in society. They're obviously of high respect and royalty, right? There might be a pharaoh, right? The pharaoh would be depicted as larger than the people. But is that always metaphor? Is it every single time a metaphor? Because you see this in ancient Sumeria as well, which is basically in the Iraq, Afghanistan region. And with the Sumerians, which is the oldest, acknowledged in the mainstream academia, they're the oldest civilization we know of. That's Mesopotamia, essentially. And their clay tablets that Zachariah Sitchin based all of his research off of basically tell us that no, these depictions and images of these people are scale. These are accurate. These are beings that are not from this planet, who are humanoid, and they made us in their image, and that they're huge, they're massive, and these Nephilim that you're referring to are versions of perhaps those larger beings, humanoid beings that the Sumerians talk about, called the Anunnaki, or various other names have been given for these people. And these people who are large, let's say even like 20 feet tall, like massive beings, created not only us in their image, but then these Nephilim were these essentially hybrids of their own large stature and the humanoids, us, the Homo sapiens sapiens. And supposedly that's where you get these other races of giants that aren't as large as the 20, 25 feet massive ones, but they're around maybe 7 to 15 feet or something like that. And some of them do have this red hair gene. And it's really interesting to follow those stories. So you can go back to the ancient past and see a lot of references. And I mean, even just in hieroglyphs, of constantly seeing different sized people. And once again, you got to ask yourself, is this always being used as metaphor? Because I'm sure sometimes it is. Let's be real. Of course, there are circumstances where it is a true metaphor, and it is using it in that way. But the ancient Egyptians, I know for sure, were quite meticulous with their records. And it seems silly to me that everything would be a metaphor and artistic. I think they were quite practical with a lot of things. And in some of these circumstances, I really do think that they were documenting to scale what these different sized beings were. And then so you move from that into more modern times. And the funny thing is, and I want to get into this side, because this is really where a lot of the meat and potatoes for the actual evidence that we do have for giants comes from. And this is from newspaper articles starting in the late 1800s all the way up into the early 1900s. And then all of a sudden it stops very abruptly, and then it becomes taboo all of a sudden. But for those listening, if you're not as familiar with this story of the giants and where we even get a lot of this anecdotal evidence from, it's actually from ancient news clippings. So I'm going to share my screen here quickly and just show a page here on a really great website called Ancient Origins. I don't pay for it, so forgive all the ads that are popping up here. And right off the bat, this is just a small little image here of all of the accounts that people have had of giants, not just bones being found, but we're talking, again, major news articles in the New York Times, in the all of the major publications of that time. I forget like the names of all of the major ones that existed back then, but anyway, all the major publications all had headlines like this here: the lost city of giants, skeleton of giant found at Juniper, Smithsonian gets huge Indian skull, prehistoric men, bones of prehistoric giants found near Miamisburg, or Miamisburg. Anyway, you get the idea. And we're talking hundreds, maybe even into the thousands of news articles throughout around the late 1800s to the early 1900s. So we've got that. We've also got these old quotes from even people like Lincoln: the eyes of that species of extinct giant whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. Abraham Lincoln, 1848. Okay?
I'd like to interject on that. So skeptics will say, or historians will say, that he's referring to mammoths. because there were mammoth bones uncovered in mounds. However, whenever they pick apart that particular quote, they don't go back a paragraph or so when he does reference mammoths. So it's kind of weird to reference mammoths and then say that race of extinct giants or a species of extinct giants and call them something else. It just doesn't quite make sense as far as writing a speech is concerned.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brandon. It's absolutely true, right? And this is the thing, like you got to dig into these things. This David and Goliath painting, one of, as Brandon was mentioning at the beginning of this episode, there are so many references to giants. I mean, we know, right? And millions of stories have giants, like the famous David and Goliath. So I've seen so many paintings and depictions of giants throughout my research, and it's really incredible. I think you also see here images of modern day people that were just quite large. Now, there is the phenomenon of gigantism. That is a real thing. And I believe this gentleman here had that because he passed away at age 24. And that's usually what happens. Andre the Giant, as another example, passed away very young because of the gigantism, I guess, side effect of that DNA kind of anomaly where you do grow quite large, but everything doesn't grow at the same rate. So your heart and all these things, die off, and you die usually quite young. So that is a thing that does exist. And so you see a lot of images of this throughout, more modern history, I guess, of just large individuals. Now, we don't know, again, if these are real, but when I think these are really interesting when you start to see the more Asian giants. And at the end of this episode, we're going to show you some unbelievable video footage of a Japanese giant that we came across recently. And who knows if it's real or not, but it's pretty compelling to watch. So you do see a lot of photographs and a lot of imagery of these giants throughout the research. So I think it's worth noting the big thing for me is the newspaper articles. You can really go into a pretty big rabbit hole with this, and I highly recommend the article here is written by let's see now two really good researchers, Hugh Newman, who's pretty much one of the forefront researchers of giants, and sorry, forgive me for the scrolling here, folks, but I'm just trying to remember I believe it's the other Vieira. I'm blanking on his name right now. He's a really good researcher too for giants, and there's some good books. Graham Hancock's going to have a book coming out, I believe, about giants as well. And
really? That's an interesting one because we went and saw him do a live presentation, and we're both huge fans of Graham's. And I was very intrigued because he was referring to the mounds of North America. And after reading that book, it almost seems like you can't dig up a mound without finding some large femur bone or perhaps a oversized helmet or skull. And I asked him, I did raise my hand and asked him about giants, and he kind of sidestepped the question. Now, my question to you would be like, if you're already into the realm of forbidden archaeology, where you're questioning the social norms and struggling to get your work published or recognized, I mean, you can't really start talking about giants, can you? Otherwise, all your hard work is down the tube. But you might as well say that a dragon scooped you up, frankly. So.
Yeah, and Graham gets enough flack from the academic community, and granted, he does pretty aggressively attack them as well. So I can see why it happens. But yeah, he has to be really careful because he's one of the most mainstream, non-mainstream, researchers out there, right? He's obviously quite popular now with the Netflix documentary series as well. And so he's got to be careful. So that's why we don't need to be as careful here. Now, we want to be careful in terms of, we don't want to feed you guys absolute garbage here on Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. We really do our best to research what we can here. But we know a lot of this is speculation. And I think it's important to play with that. I think, you need healthy speculation, but you need healthy imagination too. And you need to have a balance of both. And I love our platform for being able to just talk about really whatever we want and not have to worry about getting the hammer beaten down on us for whatever the academics want to throw at us. So I think to wrap this up on this section, for those watching and listening, really take a look at the newspaper articles. There's some really incredible stuff that you can dig up and look into the, Jim Vieira, Hugh Newman, and other researchers like them who have done great work at compiling all this stuff and saving you a lot of time. And of course, they give you all the references that you can go check out yourself. But their books, on giants are really fantastic and worth checking out, or even just YouTubing some of their talks are pretty compelling. So we've got a lot of evidence from the photographs and from the newspaper clippings of this time. But then there's also other evidence. And one of the really interesting stories, now this is a story, and I want to get into this, and I know Brandon's got some good information on this too, is the Kandahar giant. And this is a supposed interaction, and an intense one at that, violent and intense interaction that some US soldiers had back in, I believe, 2002 or 2001. And it was hush hush for a while, and then I think in 2017 or 2016, the story kind of came back on the internet. And yes, there's a ton of conspiracy theory, skepticism, and all this other stuff surrounding the story. Do I know if it's true? Of course, I have no idea if this is true or not. But it was a story that circulated enough to, in my mind, be worthy of some research and some investigation at the very least. And this story is pretty incredible. So before I start sharing my screen, Brandon, when you first came across the story of the Kandahar giant, and we'll tell the story for the audience in a second. What were your impressions of this? Because I thought it was at first kind of unbelievable, and then the more I looked into it, pretty compelling.
Yeah, well, one of the big things that jumps right out to me right away is I do believe the people of Kandahar have their own belief in a giant that does frequent that area. They offer goats to it. They see it as the protector of the village, but it's kind of this duality. You must sacrifice things to it to keep it happy. From what I understand, now people could say misinformation and everything like that. It's hard to get a lot of information on this kind of thing. I believe Coast to Coast might have been the first place that I heard that whisper.
I think so.
And that was a long time ago. Now this is since, the Western occupation of Afghanistan where this story comes from. My first instincts were, wow, what a story. I mean, like I always say, as an actor and screenwriter, I always think of wow, the stories. And, even Indiana Jones references this when all these North American accounts say that all the skeletons end up in the Smithsonian and disappear. That last shot with all the crates in the Smithsonian. I mean, it's hard not to think that they're referencing this in some way. So it was a very compelling story. And if you're going to take us down there, I think the audience is going to love to hear about it if it's their first time hearing. So.
Yeah. All right. So everybody, buckle up. It's really fascinating. So this story starts in Afghanistan. So, the US has just invaded, and essentially in 2002, this elite tactical team was supposedly, to have set out to find and to find this giant. But the reason why, and Brandon, step in anytime you've heard, because there's different versions of the story. That's what I've come across too. So, I'm going to tell kind of the version I've heard, and Brandon, step in if you've heard other variations on this.
Well, first things first, flaming red hair, 6 fingers. I mean, if it is fake, they're certainly doing their due diligence with the myths.
Yeah, because like we said before, these, and now not all giants have this red hair, 6 teeth, or 6 fingers and 2 rows of teeth, but a lot do. And, and we can go into this but there are other types of giants, like the Cyclops is another one that's really interesting. We can talk about it a little bit later. But for this story, so in 2002, the US military gets a report of a team that had gone missing. And so they just missing in action and no reports as to where they got to. So they sent out another team to go look for them. And as this team goes into the remote sort of mountainous regions of Kandahar, I believe, right, is that region. And as they go out, they start to find this sort of the area where the signal distress was sent out from. And as they approach this area, it's kind of going up a hill leading to almost like a sort of mountainous cave area, they start to see different, pretty disturbing things, like a backpack laying around, and then a gun laying around, and then unfortunately like a severed hand laying around and body parts all of a sudden laying around and like scattered all over the place, like just a massacre, an absolute mess of a massacre. And so, of course, these troops, this pretty highly trained group of an elite tactical team, are on a high alert. And so, as they go up this hill, they hear a noise coming from the cave, and it's just gut wrenchingly terrifying. And all of a sudden, out of this cave comes this 13-foot, beast with flaming red hair, and he's holding a spear of some kind. And then, almost faster than they could ever even imagine, this thing moves at them with an unimaginable speed. That's one thing that really stuck out to me when they were telling the story, was the speed of this giant. I think in a lot of depictions, we think of giants as these slow, kind of dumb creatures. This thing did not, at the very least, seem slow. It was extremely fast and precise, terrifyingly so, and still 13 feet tall. And the first guy that was closest to this giant just gets skewered on this spear in 2 seconds. I believe this giant wiped out at least 3 to 4 members of the tactical team within seconds.
Yeah, the report was that when he got him with this pike or spear that he has, not only did he pick him up, but he was able to push him down as if like on a shish kebab, so that he was almost at the hilt of this thing and kept coming for more. As in, his intention was to have several soldiers on this pike and still be able to wield it as a weapon. So
Unreal.
Just to kind of put into perspective the sheer terror.
The strength too. Just sorry. Imagine just folks, like the strength. This guy's with one hand lifting up not only a highly trained tactical soldier who's probably weighing in at normally at like 170 to 200 pounds of muscle, plus without all the gear. Yeah. With then all this gear, and one hand just like nothing. Like, that's terrifying. Anyway, go ahead.
Note the mountains behind the town here. So this is we're not talking about in the village. We're talking about in very remote areas where comm equipment is even hard to function. Believe it or not, we love to think that satellite phones and everything works so well everywhere. But as a backwoods country camper, I'll tell you right now that a lot of times it's pretty easy to lose a signal. And they were in a very remote area when encountering this beast. I think it might have had a shield with it too. I can't remember if that was, if I'm making that up or not. But I do remember them talking about their training back in when they were training in Afghanistan, and they had several positions, and one of them was well above the heads of the soldiers that, their targets or whatever was. It was, aim for the head, aim for the chest, aim for kind of like the, say the knees or something. And then there was the fourth position up high, and they were like, why are we shooting way above these people's heads? And when encountering this beast, they were shooting at it, and it was almost like the bullets, they said, were not really affecting it, which is something that's hard for me to understand, having this like skin of steel almost, which is, might sound absolutely ridiculous, but it could be an ancient tech, or it could just be the sheer genetics of this thing. But they had to shoot that fourth position. The soldiers recounted it. Their training kicked in, and they started shooting high, and it was almost like this training made sense only when they encountered a giant. So pretty interesting stuff.
And so the question, of course, has to come up, which is, why are they training? Why is the U.S. military training their soldiers to shoot at something 13 feet tall, right? If there's nothing, legitimate about this. So we only got about 10 minutes left in our talk here today. So I want to wrap up the story because we got some incredible footage to end this with. But the Kandahar giant, the other interesting things about it are that once they killed this thing, and they did bring it down, they were able to put enough bullets in this thing that it finally got
its face. They had to shoot it in the face.
Headshot. Anyone that plays video games know, like, that's where you get your most critical damage. And it's true.
Pretty much sounds like a video game.
It does sound like our life is a video game. But anyway, so they apparently, the soldiers reported in, and then, the evac helicopter comes in and basically airlifts this giant out of there. And then the questions start to come, well, okay, where is this giant going? What are they doing with this giant? And you hear a lot about these super soldier programs, and not just, of course, the U.S. military, but militaries all around the world. This giant would be a gold mine for the super soldier programs. If you think about how many bullets it took to take this thing down, this skin, I'm a believer of these giants were genetically like it's not a tech thing. It's an actual genetics thing that their skin is like Kevlar. So I think that they have a real treasure trove on their hands with this giants. If any of this, of course, is true, and I think it's just really interesting that I can only imagine what these militaries around the world, places like the Vatican archives and other, the Smithsonian, as we said too, what do they really have in their archives? What do they have access to? I feel like we get 2% at best of what they've really got going on with their knowledge and with their information and tech and all this stuff. And it just always makes me so fascinated to know what in the hell do they really have at these
So
places.
to wrap up that story, basically they medevac or extract this giant skeleton, this giant's body out of here, and all of the soldiers were basically told, "We don't speak of this. This is completely top secret. You can't speak of this." And when they went back to camp, it was almost like people kind of knew about it, almost as if this has happened in the past, and they were referring to the big man and things like that, but you couldn't really talk about it. And it was this kind of thing that everybody wanted to talk about because, this is a traumatic experience, but you can't.
And this happens so often. Brandon and myself are really, really we love listening to whistleblowers coming out and talking about all kinds of stuff, extraterrestrial, disclosure things, all that stuff. And the thing that I hear about all the time is just you can't talk about anything in any of these organizations like the Army, CIA, any of the three-letter, alphabet organizations, or even like in certain news reporting situations. You just can't. There's so many taboo subjects that you're not allowed to discuss, or else at best you'll be fired and blacklisted, and at worst, murdered. You'll be killed for talking
They
about
usually
this
come
stuff.
for your family too. It sounds like most people
Yeah,
don't value their own life as much as they do their family.
it's
So
true.
that's a good way.
And, it's a great way to keep people quiet. So that's the Kandahar giant. And then I want to bring the most interesting, and in my opinion, the most interesting evidence. And that is, and I'm actually surprised I found this on YouTube because I usually watch this on Rumble. But look at this.
I'd just like to say, as we have that image there, I mean, if you take a look at this being's bodily dimensions as well, note that it doesn't look human. If this was just someone showing a large human, why are the arms so short? Why are the traps so big? Just take a look at these proportions and think that it's almost human-like, but it's not really human. It's interesting.
So this is in Japan, as you can obviously see. And when is this footage shot? I don't know. But of course, as you can see, I mean, look at his proportions. We're going to go back to this and analyze it in a second here, but I'm just going to play the whole clip for you guys. So this is clearly a parade where once again, there was a time in our history when something like this was celebrated and it was clearly public knowledge. So what's really interesting is to see how things through generations can go from being publicly known, like everyone accepts it, to being not only secret and unknown, but taboo. And you can't talk about it, or else you're fired or ridiculed. And
Well, giants in the past were considered a ruling class. I mean, if you think about the sheer physical stature of that, I mean, it's kind of hard to deny them a seat of power if you're
right.
if things come down to fisticuffs. I don't, Goliath is the exception to the defeat, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think there's lots of Davids taking down every giant. That's why we keep hearing about that story.
A lot of the myths you hear about too are giants not always being the nicest. I'm sure I heard that the Cyclops actually were quite benevolent, but lots of them were not. And apparently it was also a really big problem before the Great Flood of 12,500 years ago. And that may have been a reason why one of the reasons why the Great Flood maybe happened more not just naturally from natural disasters, but perhaps it was orchestrated by who the hell knows. But it was also to wipe out a lot of these giants that were just decimating the planet. And look at this shot here. I always think that one's like just wild. I mean, could you fake that? I'm sure you can. It's a lot harder with old film like this But for those who don't see the images that we're showing right now, what we're looking at is just an incredibly, I believe, at least, oh God, at least 15 feet tall giant here. And I'm gonna go back to some clips here where we can really look at here. I'm gonna pause it here. And so again, if you're not watching this, hop on YouTube and take a watch on this. But to sort of describe it to you guys, this being is twice the size of every human that it's around right now. And like Brandon mentioned, it's not proportioned like a human being is. So that's another interesting giveaway as to, the head kind of looks normal. And that's not always the case with some of these
I think
things.
the head's friggin' massive, man.
It's massive.
Like, look at the size of that head.
It's huge.
I don't know.
Huge. It's huge. But I'm just saying, like, as a human head, if I were to just crop out only the head, I could be like, that looks pretty human to me. But look at the traps, right? Like, look at the muscles from the top of the neck and where the jaw is coming down to the shoulder. Like, that's
even
crazy.
The best bodybuilder, and then like the arms almost nuts. Resemble that of a baby. I mean,
yeah, right.
It looks like a baby
arms.
I mean, but who knows? Like, I'm not. I'm not an expert on what a giant really looks like. This could be true.
It's really perplexing. It could be fake, but as you've been saying
footage,
before,
like you said, and the shadows and everything. Shadows. I mean, it's not. If this is CGI, and I don't see a bunch of experts coming out and saying it's fake. Although, of course, you're gonna hear people say it's fake before they say it's real, just because that's obviously the right answer to say. You can't say it's real.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So, as we wrap up this episode, I think the big takeaway for me is really just, to keep, I think healthy skepticism is very important. And at the same time, healthy imagination is also equally as important, because if we just say everything's a fake, we're really missing out on, I believe, an unimaginably colorful and empowering history that is better than any science fiction or fantasy novel you'll ever read. So, I think for me, my final kind of thoughts on today are that there's a lot of evidence out there if you start looking for it. And then what you really start to see is there's also a lot of cover up, and it's pretty obvious. It's not a really conspiracy thing to say. It's just kind of true. And you see all of a sudden they stop printing about giants. So what's that all about? I'm not sure, but I think today's topic was really fascinating. So thanks for everybody for watching. And Brandon, I'd just love to hear your final thoughts as we wrap up here.
So as a storyteller, I would just say that the story of giants existing is a better story than not. And every culture seems to have them. So show me a renowned culture without a story of giants, and go back into those cultures and tell me that they're not taking this seriously. It's just a great story to look at, and there are similarities and anomalies. And just like I said, if you look at the Bible and everything like that, creditable sources that we take as something to cherish, and then it's funny that we cherry pick what we cherish out of those texts. So those are my thoughts. I like to stay curious and imagine a world full of magic. It's just a better place to be as a performer and an artist. But saying that, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our content creator, Chris, for having me on the show. Thank you so much for letting me do this. To all of our listeners, thanks for listening, and stay kind, stay curious, and stay tuned. Make sure you check out Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. 33 cents a day, gives you insider information, brings you into the exclusive club and community. So check it out. Keep supporting Chris so he can keep making videos. And thank you so much, and we'll chat soon.